Take your Bibles, please, this morning and turn to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2. Last week we read from Matthew chapter 1. This morning we're reading from Matthew chapter 2. The Gospel of Matthew chapter 2. And while you're turning there, let me remind you that today is the last Sunday that I get to tell you about this pretty teal-covered envelope. It's in all of your boxes. Everybody has one, and you can always use the additional envelopes that we have in the sanctuary. Next Sunday is our designated day of giving for Lottie Moon Christmas offering. This becomes part of our larger giving for missions through Southern Baptist causes. This is probably the most important week to be thinking about what we do as God's people in taking the gospel into all of the earth. And one of the best ways that we help make that happen as a group of churches, thousands of churches cooperating together, is that we give to international missions at this time of the year. So don't forget about Lottie. You cannot have Christmas without Lottie. If you're Baptist, you have to say amen. Amen. Well, yeah, but you should have jumped on that right away. All right, but just remember, next week is our designated time to give. Yes, you can give to Lottie anytime, and we will happily take it and pass it along, but we want to do well next Sunday morning. We'll do that as part of our morning worship next Sunday. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, I'm going to be reading in verse 1. I'm reading from the New American Standard Version of the Bible, and you please follow along with whatever translation of God's Word that you have with you today. The Bible says in verse 1, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Magi, wise men, from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east, and we have come to worship him.' And when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him." When Herod was troubled, Jerusalem was troubled. "And so gathering together all of the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired," that is Herod, he inquired of them where the Messiah would be born. "Well, I've heard there's a new king being born. Surely there's something in the Old Testament about this. Where will it happen?" And in verse 5, the scribes and Pharisees said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what was written by the prophet. You, Bethlehem in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called the Magi back in and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully, diligently for the child, and when you have found him, come back and report to me, so that I may too come and worship him." Of course, Herod, as we know from the story, had no intention of worshiping. He wanted to eliminate someone who was a threat to his rule. So verse 9 says, "After hearing the king, they went their way, and the star, which they had seen in the east, went on before them until it came and stood over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And after coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshipped him. And then opening their treasures, presented to him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And having been warned by God in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi left for their own country by another way. Now when they were gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him.' So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night, and left for Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I have called my son.' Then when Herod saw he had been tricked by the wise men. He became enraged and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi, the wise men. Then what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up now and take the child and his mother and go back into the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead." So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the regions of Galilee, the northern part of Israel. And he came and lived in a city called Nazareth. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets. He shall be called a Nazarene. I told you last Sunday about the forgotten man of Christmas, Joseph. He gets no lines at all in any of the gospel passages about the birth of Christ, but he is incredibly important to us as people who believe in God, because he is a shining example of someone who was committed to God, compassionate for those around him, especially Mary, and courageous in his obedience to God. You cannot, I just said a moment ago, you can't hardly have Christmas without light. I'm telling you, you absolutely cannot have Christmas without Joseph, because he's such an example. Well, that was last week. That was Matthew chapter 1. Today we're reading Matthew chapter 2, and I want you to see that in chapter 2 we have the exact opposite of chapter 1. Herod is the exact opposite of Joseph. If Joseph is the forgotten good man of Christmas, Herod is, and I don't know anything else to call him, you can see the title in the bulletin, Herod is the ugly man of Christmas. Everything that Joseph was, Herod was not. Joseph, as we saw, was a man who wanted to obey God's law. Herod ignored God's word anytime it suited him. Joseph was a man who wanted to take care of Mary, even though he just had no idea what she had done until God explained it to him in a dream. Herod is the kind of king, as you can see, who takes innocent lives without even a moment's notice. It's just business as usual for him. Joseph was a man who was courageous in his obedience to God. When God told him what was happening, Joseph said, "That's it, I'm going to do it." Herod turns out to be ultimately one of the world's biggest cowards. And you see the first hint of Herod's cowardice in verse 3. Would you look back at that? Look at chapter 2, verse 3. The wise men, who are royal figures in their own right, that they have some royal standing. They have followed protocol. They have done what royals always do with each other. As they come into the land of Judea, searching for the new king, they first stop at the capital. They come to Jerusalem and pay their respects to the local ruler. That's Herod. And they happily tell him the good news that they have witnessed in the appearance of the star. Herod, man, are you lucky? We have come. Maybe you haven't noticed this. Maybe we can see it better at a distance. But there is a star hanging over your country, and we believe this star is telling us that a new king has been born. And in the Sometimes I have to prompt you to say amen. You notice I didn't have to prompt y'all a bit to go, oh, when I told you that Finn was here this morning. Yeah, see, y'all know that. You know the birth of a child is good news, isn't it? Amen. Yes, it always is. It always is. Say it with me. It always is. And in this story, the birth of a new king is even better news. And I mean, we sense that, or at least some of the world senses that, even in our own lifetimes. If you follow the reports, you know that especially in England, every time the royal family announces a new birth, what happens? The streets are filled, people cheer, they're waving the British flag, and it's like a national holiday every time the royal family announces a new birth. Have you seen that? You do watch the news, yes? Okay. And I mean, think about how long has this been going on? Just in the last 20 to 30 years. You know, Charles and Diana brought out William and then Harry. And what did you see? Streets filled with people cheering. William and Kate have brought out now so far George, Charlotte, and Louis, if I'm up to date. Anybody follow the royals? Am I up to date? Did I research that correctly? Okay. And I understand now that Harry and Meghan have announced that they're expecting, and what happens? Same thing. People outside their house just go, oh, this is great. And whether you follow the royals or not, this is the appropriate response. Because the birth of a child is always good news. So isn't Herod's reaction in verse 3? Look at verse 3. Isn't Herod's reaction odd? Verse 3 says that Herod was troubled. Well, wait, no, he wasn't joyful. He didn't say, oh, that's awesome. He didn't say, well, maybe I should send a gift. He was troubled to the point that the end of verse 3 says he was so upset, he was so outdone, he was so flabbergasted, he was so discombobulated, think of another word here, that even the city seemed to be troubled with him. He was that troubled. He didn't keep it to himself. And you think, well, what an odd reaction to good news. It turns out that for Herod, it's a perfectly predictable, perfectly logical, perfectly normal reaction for Herod. Herod, if you don't know the story of the early days of the New Testament, was a political player who was always out on the very edge, always manipulating, always scheming, always trying to make sure that nothing took his reign off balance. He specialized in having all the bases covered. Now let me tell you about Herod. He was by birth an Arab, by religion a practicing Jew. Now, when was the last time you heard of an Arab who was a practicing Jew? Okay, he was an Arab by birth, a practicing Jew, and a Roman citizen. He had all the bases covered, and that's the way he liked it. And he watched his political enemies. He watched any possible political threat to his power like a hawk. I was up here at the church yesterday, and I just come to drop something off in my office, and I pulled into the parking lot over here, and I couldn't help notice that up here, right on the top of our steeple, right on the very pinpoint of our steeple, there was the world's biggest buzzard. I thought, and I'm not happy with how this looks. But he wasn't just sitting up on the top. I guess he was kind of holding himself in the wind. He had his wings out. And so there for just a few minutes, and I was hoping I could get a picture, slid the car around, stopped, jumped out, when he was already gone. But he's up at the top of the steeple, and the wings out. And I was like, I don't know what he's seen, but he was looking for something, and in just a moment he flew off and went for it. And I couldn't help but think, Herod. That's probably as good of an illustration of Herod as you could ever find. A big old nasty buzzard just sitting there with the wings out, ready to go. That's Herod. So news of the birth of a new king was not good news to him. It was news of a new threat. Herod did not like any person or any situation that might throw him off balance. Now here's the thing. The older and the sicker that Herod got, the more cruel and the more unbalanced he became in the way that he sought out those who might be a threat to him. Get this. Before he was done, Herod ultimately, get ready to take guns, murdered his wife, her 2 sons, her brother, her grandfather, her mother, 45 members of the Sanhedrin Council, that's Jewish priests, and as recorded here in Matthew, a great number of the children in Bethlehem. Caesar Augustus, who was the Caesar at the time of the birth of Christ, knowing that Herod was a practicing Jew, and as you know, Jews don't eat pork. I've never understood that one, how God can withhold bacon from any of his people. But knowing that Jews don't eat pork, Caesar Augustus once said, it would be better to be Herod's pig than his son. So the word was out on Herod. In short, he was a cruel and vicious man who couldn't die soon enough. And when he finally died, which was not long after the birth of Christ, when he finally died, he died as a coward who was terrified that somebody was going to take his place. If he had simply listened while he worshiped as a Jew, if he would have just listened, as we say to the children sometimes, if he had just gotten the peanut butter out of his ears, he would have known all along that kings don't control their own destinies. God does. He would have discovered that you cannot hide from God's plan. And what I want to tell you this morning is that that same lesson that Herod so badly missed also goes for regular folks like us, not just kings. You can try to hide from God. You can try to run from God. You can try to fight against God. But you will not ever overcome God. God is, let me say it to you this way, very good at causing God's will to happen. He is the great pursuer. The Bible says that God is not willing that any should perish. And so he invites us, he calls us, he draws us. And many of you have had that time in your life when you heard God speak to your heart in that very close and personal way. And you heard God say through his Spirit, come to me, trust me, accept my Son for your salvation. Do you remember that? That's what God does very well. And when we fight against that, even still, God still pursues. He then moves from drawing and pulling to confronting and insisting and demanding our attention. God gives every man, every woman, the opportunity to have a saving relationship with his Son Jesus. Now Herod chose to run from that. And he ended up going down in history as one of the chief lowlifes who was so troubled over the birth of God's chosen Messiah that he couldn't see straight. And if he had simply listened to what God had been saying to him all along, he could have gone down in history as a man who was at peace with God's plan for his life. I can't get over what verse 3 says. It says Herod was troubled. It's just so odd. It's not right. It's off balance. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about that one word, and I won't do that a couple more times, but I do want you to see two other words that are used to describe Herod in this chapter. And I think if you put these two words along with the word troubled, you get a good picture of who Herod was. And I'll do these quickly. Look at verse 7. Verse 7 says that when Herod realized what was going on, that he secretly called the wise men back in and questioned them. He did not tell them what he was up to. He lied to them. They would have never talked to him if they had any idea of what he was thinking about doing. And that's typical Herod. He thought he could get away with his own secret plans. Then in verse 16, if you'll look there, in verse 16, the Bible says that Herod was enraged when the wise men did not return and tell him exactly where he could find the baby. And so as a result, he slaughtered every male child under 2 years of age in Bethlehem. Here is a man, do you see it? Are you beginning to sense it? Here is a man who is completely eaten up with his need to have things his own way. Here is a man who has moved God completely out of his life, even though God had offered him time and time again his peace. By the way, in talking about the age of the children, 2 years, just to ruin all of your major scenes. Union rules here in operation. You notice that the fact that Herod killed the children up to the age of 2 years shows us that the wise men probably were not at the manger. Sorry. I don't know why I had to ruin everybody's Christmas, but I just thought I would help you understand what the scriptures tell me. It probably took the wise men almost 2 years to make it to Judea after they first saw the star. But keep the wise men in your manger scene, keep the scene, because they're really cool. In any case, now that I've ruined Christmas, when I look at those three words, troubled, secret, enraged, I come away wanting to ask God, why is Matthew chapter 2 in the Bible? I mean, when you look at the purity and the innocence of the manger, and I mean, you can see it. Mary and Joseph, and there's the baby lying in the hay, and the angels are singing, and the shepherds are there with awe and wonder in their faces. And what is this bit with Herod and Bethlehem? I mean, doesn't it just, let's be honest, doesn't it just make you want to go, ugh? Now, I want everybody to do that. No. Doesn't it? I mean, this just doesn't fit. Why is this part of the story here? I confess that I cannot explain that question completely. God will explain that one day for us. I can't give you the whole thing, but I can give you this one part. And I want you to get this. I can give you this part. The brutality of Herod in chapter you see the contrast with chapter 1. In chapter 1, you have Joseph, committed to God, compassionate for those around him, courageous in his obedience. In chapter 2, you have Herod, troubled, secretive, enraged, plotting, scheming, destroying his own family, as well as the lives of countless others. All to get his way. He is, again, back to my word, absolutely ugly in his rebellion against God and ugly in his obliviousness to others. And you, unless you're just not looking, you cannot miss the difference. If you read Matthew 1 and Matthew 2 together, you cannot miss the difference. You cannot avoid the contrast in the two stories. You cannot escape asking yourself the question, having seen the good and the bad, what kind of person do I want to be? And how do I respond to God? Here are the wide parameters. Joseph, here. Now, here's what you need to understand before you take that question any further. The God who shaped the heart of Herod is also the God. I said that wrong. This is what happens when you turn preachers loose. I'll try it one more time. The God who shaped the heart of Joseph is also the God who tried to shape the heart of Herod. With Joseph, he had a willing vessel, and the result was commitment, compassion, courage. With Herod, he had a man who decided that he would just not be shaped. And the question is, how are you going to respond? And if you're thinking, well, do I have to give you an answer right now? It's not that you have to give me an answer. That you have to give God an answer, because the God who shaped Joseph's heart and is the God who tried to shape at least Herod's heart, is the God who is active in our lives right now. Now, whether or not you want to say amen to this, it is up to you. But I'm telling you, the same God is now active trying to shape your hearts. He's at work in me, and he's at work in you, and you know when he is pulling, when he is drawing, when he is saying, come. And it's not that you have to answer me. It's that you have to answer him. How will you respond? And I will close by telling you this. For every person who has ever read these stories and has said, when they looked at the ugliness of Herod, and said, oh, I won't be like that. Stephen Train. Just thought I'd tell you that. I have the gift of encouragement. what would we do with that? Would you stand and pray with me, please? Father in heaven, in the Bible story, we see two ways that we could go. Two things that we could become. Two ways that we could respond to God. One is obviously the more honorable. One is obviously more pleasing to you. One is obviously going to bring us to a better place in eternity. And yet so often we find ourselves being obstinate and not wanting to say yes to you. And so this morning, we want to be very careful to listen to what you're saying to us. We want to be very careful to ask, are we living our lives in a way that would bring glory and honor to your name? When we tell others that we are believers, that we are Christians, can they look at our lives and see, yes, that's true. Yes, I see it in their words. Yes, I see it in their attitudes. Yes, I see it in their responses. We want to be careful, Father. We never want to disappoint you. Instead, we want to honor you. Our lives, every day of our lives, it is an offering, as the song says, and we bring that offering to you this morning, Father. And we ask that you would help us to always choose well. We pray that you would help us to choose your Son. We pray that you would help us to choose lives that are righteous. So whatever decision we need to make in light of that direction, Father, would you help us to do that today? And I pray for anyone that would want to come and share a decision with your people. I pray for anyone that would want to come and just spend some time at the altar. Whatever they need to do, would you help us and pray today?